I'm going to take you through the game between Wang Hao and Alexander Grischuk, played in round 10 of the candidates. This is the game where Grischuk thought for 72 minutes over one move. And I'm going to try to explain exactly why he consumed so much time. It's a crazy game. I hope you enjoy it. Don't forget, like, comment, share and subscribe. Let's try and hit the 100k total at some point. And of course, do consider supporting the channel via PayPal or Patreon. Okay, on with the game. Wang Hao with white, Grischuk playing the French. Neither player enjoying a great tournament, but both players really going for it in this game. Classical French, I'm a big fan of this system. My recommendation on my French DVD for Chess Base. And Wang Hao goes for this system with knight e2, so-called Steinitz variation. It basically means by withdrawing the knight, he's able to support his pawn on d4 with c3. This is a really ambitious continuation for white, because basically white is trying to hold together this big center, and if white can hold that center, it means black's pieces are really cramped, and that could simply be good for white. So what black has to do here is break free. You have to try and break free, otherwise you just get squashed. So that's why we see moves like pawn to f6 from Grischuk, already trying to open the f file. Here Wang Hao played bishop e3. He said afterwards that he forgot his theory. He already spent 10 minutes over that move. Incredible. I really like Wang Hao. He's such a nice personality. Seems to be really dozy, but he's got a razor sharp mind. Very nice guy. And Grischuk castles. So you can see with the rook on f8, there's already some kind of pressure here. g3. Letting that bishop out maybe to g2, maybe to h3. Queen b6. Okay, standard move in the French. Pressure on d4, pressure on b2. Queen d2 defends the b pawn. And it's in this position, after just 11 moves, that Grischuk thought for 72 minutes. Now, that is extraordinary, considering that they only start with 100 minutes on the clock. Of course, it's not a very practical thing to do. Why do you think so long? Well, okay, that's Grischuk for you. But the thing is, if you don't break out in this position, then you can just get squashed so easily. So, for example, Grischuk said afterwards that, you know, he was looking at pawn to a5, a kind of standard move. But the thing is, you know, after this and bishop h3, it's already pretty unpleasant. Notice this knight. If black doesn't break free, that knight just looks terrible on d7. The move that Grischuk wanted to play, pawn takes pawn on d4, and did eventually play, well, this leads to enormous complications. And basically Grischuk wanted to make sure he got it right before playing this move. It could be that this move just leaves you with a rotten position, and that's why he invested this time. Now, I'm going to go into a little bit of detail here. So if you want to skip the next couple of minutes, please move on with the video. But it is fascinating. And here, Wang Hao, after about 20 minutes, recaptured with the f3 knight. But as Grischuk said, he didn't even consider that move. I mean, that's the funny thing about this enormous calculation. In fact, the only move that Grischuk really considered was knight e takes d4. Looks like the most natural move. Right, so this is not the game continuation, but I'm going to try to explain why Grischuk spent so long calculating this. I should say that these variations are based on Grischuk's thoughts in the post-mortem. So he tried to explain what he was looking at. So first of all, well, what about... Grischuk said he looked at two moves here. Pawn takes pawn. And knight c takes e5. So this one is interesting. Just giving up a piece. And you can see that the queen now defends e6. Black has two pawns and a strong centre. But this is tricky. But Grischuk calculated this variation. At first he thought this was okay. Queen c5 is also possible. But he looked at knight takes c5 mainly. And at first he thought this might be playable. There are certain threats down here. Watch out for that. Even though black is a piece down, this is very dangerous. And at first he thought this might be okay for black. So black is going to win some material back. But he realized after a bit that white has a really good move here. Rook d4. And remember, white's a piece up. If black takes the rook, checkmate at the side of the board. There we go. That's very nice. He also looked at queen takes c5, hoping to make that work, but he realized that this was probably not good enough for black, not enough compensation for the piece. So that's one variation. He also looked at pawn takes pawn, and this gets really wild, as if that one, the last variations weren't wild enough. So knight takes, bishop threatens the queen. Knight takes rook. But now d4. Knight takes rook. Pawn takes bishop. And at first he thought this was simply winning for white. After king takes, bishop, queen d5, threatening two mates, and this is too much, threatening mate on f7 with the rook covering the d file. And he jumped back and forth between variations. But then he came back to this variation, realised that actually king h8 would give him a winning position, because after queen takes queen d5, knight f6 covers the g8 square, prevents mate and attacks the queen, and this is just better for black because this can be taken. Okay, that's only skimming the surface of this move. Knight e takes d4, but basically after analysing for so long, jumping back and forth, he realised that c takes d4 was playable, but you can see he had to get the tactics right. He had to justify this move. But then Hao just recaptured with the f-knight, and then he was back to square one because he hadn't really analysed that move at all. And the funny thing is, he didn't play the best move here. He has a strong move. So Grischuk played knight c5, a very natural move, making sure this pawn is covered and then the knight comes in. But actually, it's not the best move. Bishop c5 is a strong move, absolutely not an obvious move. Okay, let's look at this. What about... So, first of all, knight takes pawn, bishop takes bishop. Okay, what about pawn takes pawn and f6? Well, black already gets very good play after this. This is a very tricky position. And throwing the knight in, this bishop is coming into play. White can't castle kingside. Black has good play. And if b4, here's the trick. Now, if black has to take here, then that's better for white. White conquers the dark squares. But here's the trick. You can play knight takes pawn. Bishop takes. Now that's a pin. So knight c3. But black has tremendous compensation for the piece here. would still need some careful thought, but basically black is just busting out here. And white's king is pretty exposed. Lots of pawns, lots of piece activity. So bishop c5 was the move, but instead knight c5 played. And now, well, at least for the next few moves, the game calms down, well, a little bit. Here, Wang Hao played knight b3. If bishop g2, a normal move, queen takes b2. Queen takes queen, knight d3 check, picks up the queen, and black is material ahead. You can see there are so many tactics in here, in this position, that you really need to be absolutely on your game. You need to calculate so well. Also, after this move, knight b3, which looks incredibly strong. So, with this pin, Grischuk also had to calculate this. Now here, for example, here's a little trick. Knight takes here. Queen takes b3 actually loses. Knight c1. Out of the blue, the queen is trapped. Incredible. Can't go back to these. They're covered by the bishops. These squares covered by the bishop. So Grischuk had to see in advance that knight e4 is actually playable. Here, Wang Hao played queen d3. If bishop takes queen, knight takes... Well, again, a crazy sequence of moves that both players had calculated and ends up in a position like this. Grischuk said he wanted to play knight e5 check here, which gives pretty decent compensation for the exchange. Bishop pair, nice centre. Wang Hao thought e5 was a good move, also with good compensation. So they were both calculating to incredible depth. Queen d3 played. Let me rattle through the next few moves. Hitting the queen, bishop g2, knight d6, the knight comes back. Knight c4 hits the pawn. And here, an excellent move from Grischuk. If he makes a standard move like bishop d7, then knight c5, and you can take the bishop, and that's very irritating. Grischuk played knight e7 very quickly. Excellent move. He appreciated that he has to try and break out with e5. And the knight defends the d5 square. So e5 is the move he wants to make. Castles, and now e5. And here is where it gets crazy again. Pawn takes pawn. Now if bishop takes, then bishop c5 is a bit annoying. You want to try and knock out the knight and play bishop takes pawn. So Grischuk flicked in a clever little Zwischenzug. Bishop f5, attacking the queen. Now if the queen retreats, then crisis averted for black. Actually, he's got enough play in this position. You can see his pieces have come out nicely. The isolated pawn doesn't matter very much. Here there's no bishop c5 to knock out that knight. Knight on c4 is a very nice piece. So after bishop f5, Wang Hao, well, he looked at the position and he looked at the clock, saw that Grischuk was already running pretty short of time and thought, right, I'm going to sacrifice my queen. And he gets two minor pieces for it. Rook is threatened. Bishop takes pawn check is threatened. So, well, rook e8. Knight f4. Very tricky. How would you like to defend that position with, well, just minutes on the clock, and you've still got to get to move 40, 17 or 18 moves to make for Grischuk to get to move 40. Incredibly difficult. So many tactics. Rook takes pawn, knight takes d5, forks these two. Queen takes, allows bishop takes pawn check, and bishop takes knight. So knight b6, good move. Now, again, I could go into massive detail here. Wang Hao played knight takes d5. Bishop takes b6. Neither player thought this was very good for white. In fact, it's the best move. And there are some crazy tactics there, but basically white should be doing okay in this position. It's very complicated. Let's crack on with the game. Knight takes d5 played. Also not bad for white. But Grischuk could have got some advantage here. Bishop d3, for the record, is a good move. Just attacking the rook, and that takes the rook away from the f-file and then bring the bishop back. Well, this is still a very difficult position for black to play, but it should be better. Compare with the game. After bishop g6, knight e6, and rook ae1. So the rooks are in their best positions. As we're going to see, white is able to use this rook on the f-file. So this knight obviously very dangerous in combination with this bishop coming to d4. Bishop f7 played. Now knight takes g7. I mean, this is absolutely fantastic from Wang Hao. Such a daring play when he sees Grischuk short of time. And here Grischuk, to my mind, inexplicably took on d5. Well, I say that. When you're short of time, anything could happen. I think, I mean, this shows incredible ambition. I shouldn't criticize Grischuk for that. I think a safe way of black to play, relatively safe, is to take here. And white has nothing better than to exchange off all these pieces and head for this endgame. So here it's bishop and 2 pawns against a rook. Should be a draw. I'd say if anyone can go wrong here, it's white. The rook is really active, or will be really active in a second. Should be a draw, but black has no risk there. But with bishop takes, wow, this is really tricky. And when you're basically playing with just seconds on the clock, it's so easy to go wrong. For example, so the knight attacks the queen. If the queen steps aside, check here. That's already checkmate. Or queen g5, again check. And h4. And that pushes the queen away from these squares. So black has to give up the queen, and then, well, white is just better in that endgame of pawn up, clear pawn up. But Grischuk, I have to say, defended well. Queen f8. Check, king g8. So you can see the queen covers those squares, preventing the knight check. But now it's still 2 minor pieces for the queen, plus a dangerous passed pawn. Those pieces can't be shifted very easily. But Grischuk, I think, defended very nicely here. He realised his king needs space. His king needs some room. h5, excellent move. So the king will come to h7. Just gives the king a little bit of room. d6. This is the great thing about Wang Hao's position. He's managed to coordinate his pieces. So this is dangerous. Knight e7 check threatened with a discovered attack on the queen. So king h7 avoids that. Knight e7 anyway. Attacks the queen. Queen e8. Rook f6. Now Wang Hao plays carefully because he realizes that if that queen can break out, he needs all his pieces defended. So the pawn protects the bishop. The bishop protects the rook. The rook protects the pawn, and the pawn protects the knight. What a picture. And that means the queen has nothing to attack. so he's safe. And here, black has nothing better than just to exchange off into this endgame. After this, here, a rook d4, and this is a fortress. A fortress that Magnus believes in, as he said in his commentary. And after this, well, they agree to draw. They're over the time control. They both survived, both players down into their final seconds. And this is a stone cold draw. Basically, you can see that all these pieces protect each other. So no targets for the queen. The only way that black could win is by bringing the king in to try and attack the king. But you can see that that king simply can't cross the line of the rook. Black can make absolutely no progress. So that's why they agreed a draw. That is a fortress. So there we go. I mean, really, I've only skimmed the surface of the kind of possibilities, the tactics, the long variations, the wild calculations that both players will have looked at in this game. But I hope that gives you an idea of why Grischuk thought for 72 minutes in this position. If you don't break out, you can lose just by getting squashed. And even when you do break out, you often have to sacrifice material. And again, it's on a razor's edge. You can lose very quickly. So that's why Grischuk invested all that time. I mean, he was very funny afterwards, actually. He said, he was asked in the press conference, what kind of impact did your 72-minute think have on the game? And he said, well, it was good for me because it made my opponent sacrifice the queen, probably not very correctly. He said, on the other hand, it made me unable to really think after the unexpected knight f takes d4. Always entertaining. Very good value. Thanks very much for watching.